Good afternoon, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing, and especially tomorrow, we were anticipating a larger scale tornado outbreak with some of the previous model runs last week and over the weekend. But now it looks like the threat of a larger scale tornado outbreak, like what we anticipated, is decreasing a little bit. So we're going to have to pinpoint those smaller scale regions where ingredients could come together for tornado potential. And tomorrow looks like a textbook example of Panhandle Magic. You can see the storm system is quite a bit slower with that vortex over the southwestern U.S. And you have a large area of pretty strong mid-level flow fanning out over to the east. And that leads you to try to find those mesoscale environments where conditions could come together for tornadoes within a very large area, all the way from the southern Texas Panhandle up through western Kansas, up even into southern Nebraska. Some of the recent models are showing some supercells up there that look to be a little bit elevated north of that west to east boundary, with some east-northeasterly winds to the north of it so far. But last week and over the weekend, it looked like this system was going to eject right at about peak heating. It was going to eject from the southern Rockies and across the plains by peak heating on Tuesday. Tomorrow, the 10-year anniversary of that super outbreak. But you can see that the really stronger, the more substantial jet dynamics are lagging behind into northern Mexico there. But if this ski jump was firing out over the southern plains, then we'd be talking about a more large-scale tornado outbreak tomorrow. But still, it only takes one tornado to cause problems, and I do think that there is definitely a high likelihood of supercell storms tomorrow. You can see that there's quite a bit of bulk shear across the southern target area, with those 40 to 50 knot 500 millibar winds increasing as you go up into the atmosphere, and probably a belt of east-southeasterly surface winds as well, contributing to that bulk shear. Basically, if you have a 10 knot surface wind out of the due east, and then your 500 millibar wind is out of the due west at 30 knots, your bulk shear between those two layers is 40 knots out there. We like to use the 0 to 6 kilometer layer with bulk shear to determine the likelihood of supercells. Another way to compute that bulk shear is to take it from the surface and then about 50% up the way of the updraft in the thunderstorm to the mid-levels of the atmosphere. That's another metric for bulk shear. And in general, you need about 30 knots of 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear for organized supercell storms, and we have plenty of that across the target area in the southern Texas Panhandle. And I like to use the RAP model to try to resolve the Caprock there in the southern Texas Panhandle. I used the RAP last year when we saw that post-Texas tornado, when there was a northern target as well across western Kansas. We targeted post-Texas, that area just off the Caprock, anticipating moisture to bank up against the Caprock Escarpment. And this is what the Caprock looks like here. This is, you can see the eastern edge here of the Caprock. This is an elevated plateau, this escarpment. When you're heading working the high plains out here, and then you're chasing from west to east, to a lot of times drop down to some lower elevations there. But moisture can definitely bank up against this caprock, so you can get higher dew points that'll bank up against this area. The Caprock Escarpment then can be mixed out. You can mix out that capping inversion. Storms will fire right along the Caprock and then just move into that deeper moisture, and then start entraining that deeper moisture into the updraft. And you can also look for gaps within the Caprock. So you can see these little gaps within the terrain here. You can also see a gap as well into the southern Texas Panhandle. These areas can also funnel easterly surface winds and locally enhance that storm relative helicity over these areas of the Caprock. So you can get easterlies that will be a little bit stronger funneling into that terrain. You can get some deeper moisture as well within these zones, within these little notches in the Caprock plateau there. So when we talk about Panhandle Magic, this is what we're talking about, that Caprock Escarpment, storms developing over the higher terrain, moving off that, and then interacting with that deeper moisture. The post-Texas tornado last year in May, late May, that one actually anchored right along the edge of the Caprock and was just pulling in, ripping in easterly winds. A lot of moisture coming into that storm, and that locally enhanced the storm relative helicity for a stationary storm there, anchored on the Caprock, and ended up being probably close to the tornado of the year for us last year, at least during the early season, if you don't count April 22nd, that big outbreak across central and eastern Oklahoma. But those are the basics for Panhandle insanity. The next day, The wrap does eject that system a little bit off to the east, but it doesn't quite have that configuration where it has a lot of flow on the backside. You do have what is starting to resemble a bit of a ski jump that ejects over the southern plains, and that could set the stage for severe weather across central Texas, southern Oklahoma, over through the Arklatex during the day on Wednesday, as this bowling ball of an upper level storm system finally pushes off to the east. And you'll notice that we do get a pretty robust low-level jet. It's probably going to be quite messy. This will likely be more of a flooding event here, but I could definitely see some tornado potential happening with this system as it ejects, and you get a bit of an elevated mix layer starting to impinge on the western edge of that low-level jet. But you can see that the core of the low-level jet, as depicted by the NAM, is from central Texas into southern Oklahoma and through the Arklatex. You get a little bit of cyclonic curvature to that low-level flow. That's generally not favorable for tornadoes, but then off to the west, we should start getting some backing of that low-level jet a little bit closer to 0Z. This is at 18Z on Wednesday from the wrap, so I expect that as we get closer to 21Z and 0Z, you'll see that low-level jet back a little bit. You'll see the western edge tighten there somewhere into central Texas and southern Oklahoma, and that'll likely be the target on Wednesday. But it doesn't quite look like the big outbreak that we were depicting last week, and that just goes to show you these forecast models are not incredibly accurate these days. And so I'm going to go back to the wrap model here and take a deeper look at our target in the Panhandle. Thank you for tuning into our Storm Chaser basketball game yesterday. Definitely do have a bit of soreness. Definitely not in game shape right now. Hoping to play a lot more basketball, though, more regularly. You just can't simulate a basketball game when you're trying to exercise. It's just really tough to prepare for. But it was fun. Thanks to everybody that came out yesterday and played. So here you can see the low-level jet as depicted by the wrap, the evolution of it. This is at 1Z, and you can see that the low-level jet does ramp up at 1Z, from 0Z to 1Z, and that often happens. That's also a part of Panhandle Magic, is those supercell storms will survive until the late afternoon or the evening, and then that low-level jet ramps up. You can see the 850 low centered over eastern Colorado there as well. And I just think that this looks like a textbook Panhandle Magic type day. It's that time of year, even late April. It's the Panhandle season down here. You've got a thicker instability axis. You've got the Caprock, the terrain features there that can locally pool the moisture, funnel it up into the gaps of the terrain. You can also see a larger scale low-level jet here, intensifying as you go from 0Z to 1 and 2Z. Look at that ramping up across western Oklahoma. That low-level jet even accelerates up to 50 knots. And normally on the larger scale, you want to target the nose of these low-level jets. But when you're dealing with Panhandle Magic, sometimes the southern mode is the one to target. You may remember the Dimmitt, Texas tornadoes too, the surprise tornadoes back in 2017 when the mainstream target was up in Nebraska and it ended up being the thicker instability axis, working that Caprock down there in the Texas Panhandle. So it does look like this is a textbook Texas Panhandle day. That's the wrap model. That's 20Z, and as you get a little bit closer, this is the 15Z wrap. And again, the wrap model, and especially the morning of, is definitely one of my favorite models to look for those small-scale target areas that might emerge, especially over the high plains, because of its ability to resolve those terrain features. These are the 850 winds Tuesday at 0Z, and you can almost see the edge of the Caprock there. At 0Z tomorrow. You can see the 850 winds kind of backing up against the plateau, and it seems like the wrap is able to resolve that quite well with those 30 knots at 850. Basically a low-level jet when you're over the lower terrain to the east of the Caprock, but pretty close to surface winds when you get near the Caprock. And then we can look at the 700 millibar winds as well. And a decent stripe of about 30 knots there through the southeastern Texas Panhandle, right along the edge of the Caprock as well. So maybe Turkey, Texas would be a pretty good target. Down toward Paducah, to the west of Paducah near Aspermont. That seems to would be a pretty decent target. Probably have some 25 to 35 knots at 700. Also, that 500 those decent 850 winds there, banked up against the plateau. And I like to use 0 to 3 kilometer indices to really pick out where we think that the best target area is going to be. And you can see here right along the Caprock Escarpment, right along the edge of that plateau, you get a little bit of moisture pooling. These are 0 to 3 kilometer EHIs here, and you can see even trying to get some funneling of those low-level winds in through those gaps into the Caprock. And it looks like we want to target this southern gap, maybe down toward Post, Texas. Might be a decent target down there. That's a decent hodograph down there near Post. 30 knots, 30 knot 1 kilometer wind, southeasterly surface wind. Pretty strong winds aloft, and you do have this S-shaped hodograph, the dreaded S shape. But when you do have this contribution here to strong positive storm relative helicity, that's going to give you some low-level mesocyclone rotation there and a tornado potential. And then we can look at the curvature to the flow, changing wind direction with height, surface wind there, east-southeasterly, low-level jet of about 30 knots, flipping over to southwesterly and westerly aloft, 100-knot upper-level jet. A little bit of a capping inversion, so you might need the higher terrain of the Caprock to fire those storms and to help break that capping inversion. But 0 to 1 kilometer shear in that environment in excess of 200, 0 to 3 kilometer shear, 250. So you do have quite a bit of a potential here for tornadoes. If you can break that cap, we get a little bit of surface heating along the Caprock. And then look at all this cape aloft. Definitely going to be some potential for guerrilla hail. One thing I noticed is this far ahead of that trough in the southwestern U.S. is that there's not much of an elevated mix layer. You don't really have that dry punch coming in at about 3 to 4 kilometers above to help steepen those lapse rates, but you still have steep lapse rates as depicted by the RAP, and that is definitely a negative of this system. But I do think that in that area, right along the escarpment, right along that Caprock, I think that that's definitely the only area to target. So we just have to decide whether waking up in Norman tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. will still get the job done. That's at 0Z. And this is at 2Z. And you can see the environment downstream starts to get some better 0 to 3 kilometer indices, and then that environment kind of falls apart downstream of the Caprock. It's possible we could get some additional severe weather there off to the east. Probably a big cap in the core of that stronger shear. Yep, look at that big capping inversion right there. So I think that really that edge of the Caprock, Escarpment, is the only place that's going to get a chance for surface-based instability and also a chance of a tornado down there. I like to use the RAP, as I mentioned, to kind of look for clues at that environment down there. You can see some decent 0 to 3 kilometer SRH too, banking right up against that Caprock in the southeastern Texas Panhandle. Just to the east of it, that 0 to 3 kilometer SRH increases above 200 in that environment. And that's why you do get that energy helicity index blob down there. You can see it really come together between about 6 and 7 p.m. 5 and 6. So between about 5 and 7 p.m. down here in the southeastern Texas Panhandle. Childress down to Post, I would say, is your target. You got to look for the gaps within that Caprock Escarpment as well. Looks like the models are hinting at that gap. The southern one over the southeastern Texas Panhandle. I know it's not called. A little further south on the Caprock Escarpment, that gap kind of on the south side of that protrusion, almost like a bulging dry line there with the Caprock Escarpment. We got to decide whether to target the northern node or the one to the south. I think down there near Post, Texas is probably going to be a decent play down there and could move into that stronger low-level wind shear. You can also look at the HRRR models. You can see some of these other targets. Northeastern Colorado, I could see some supercells evolving into far northwestern Kansas, southern Nebraska. Not a lot of instability up there, but I could still see some hailers, elevated hail producers up there, but these are going to have a tendency to be elevated. You can see these northerly winds at the surface there. Decent hodograph shape because of those northeasterlies, bringing that hodograph down into the lower left quadrant. Colorado chasers will probably be pretty excited to be chasing this event. Well, I think there's going to be 2 targets, probably eastern Colorado out near Ray and along the Kansas-Nebraska border. More likely those supercells will be on the north side of that, on the elevated side, and then Panhandle Magic over the southeastern Texas Panhandle. That's where we're going to target. See if the latest HRRR agrees. Have to look at the 12Z. And this is going to be one of those setups that kind of comes together the day of, the morning of. HRRR probably won't like this setup as much as the wrap. And it certainly doesn't. It shows kind of a lack of instability, but it still hints at this environment over the southeastern Texas Panhandle becoming marginally supportive of tornadoes between about 6 and 7 p.m. down there. And really it fires these storms out a little bit early. But it's not, it looks like there's going to be a lot of cloud cover. Kind of the lack of that elevated mix layer is going to be the demise of this setup. But if you're going to target anywhere, you want to target that southeastern Texas Panhandle out there. Bands of convection coming through, but there definitely is likely going to be a lot of cloud cover out there. It all depends on if a stronger than forecast elevated mix layer can prevent those storms from developing. If we can back this low-level jet right up against the Caprock, get some daytime heating to try to get a little bit of low-level cape out there. And I do think that there is a chance for a supercell or 2 out near the Caprock. The HRRR doesn't like it at all. Really mitigates instability out there. 3-kilometer NAM shows a slightly better environment down here, streaming into post. Definitely hints at slightly better environment down there. Decent hodograph shape down near post with about an 81/65 type of an environment. So I think post Texas is probably going to be the target. You can see that hodograph right out there. This is the 3-kilometer NAM. You may remember the NAM models and the REP handled this last event pretty well, better than the HRRR did, that's for sure. So I definitely like the way that this looks down near post. Look at that. East-southeasterly wind streaming up, 81/65, quite a bit of cape. Nice looping hodograph there with your 0 to 1 kilometer winds out of the east, a lot of an easterly component. And then aloft, 2 to 6 kilometers, pretty strong winds, 40, 50, 60, 70 kilometers up there. So this is a pretty nice hodograph that could yield some tornado potential. And the 3-kilometer NAM even has a hint of an elevated mix layer. You can see that green line on the sounding there. A little bit of a dry punch in the 3-kilometer layer is going to lead to even more cape as well. So the 3-kilometer NAM is showing quite a bit more destabilization across the southeastern Texas Panhandle. I think that's the only target, is down there near post. And you can definitely see the 3-kilometer NAM has a supercell down there near the post Texas area. And it also has one a little bit further north, southeastern Texas Panhandle. So this model here looks to be the most favorable for tornado potential. Maybe down near Lubbock. Post area, definitely liking that post zone. And as we mentioned with the Caprock, you can see these the dew points streaming in to that area and post once again. So I'm pretty sure that's where we're going to end up tomorrow. I'm taking some imagery right now. See this streamer? Whenever I'm working the high plains, I like to use the 0 to 3 kilometer indices and then look for those pipes of moisture that get fed into the gaps in the terrain of the Caprock. The Caprock stretching through the central eastern Texas Panhandle right here. And these moisture plumes like to interact with those gaps in the terrain. That's how I see those tornadoes in Wyoming, Colorado, up there, and even a PDS tornado sounding down here in the NAM, down near post. So I think that's where we're going to need to go. Probably have to wake up quite early tomorrow morning to get down there. I was probably able to find the only PDS tornado sounding in the entire setup tomorrow. So that's what we're targeting, right on the nose of that pipe of moisture that's getting fed into the gaps of the terrain. Looking at the surface winds, you can see those easterly winds transporting that moisture up into the Texas Panhandle, up into post. Definitely happening here. Look at the surface map. We'll be able to see the deeper moisture getting fed right up into the terrain. So this is definitely looking a lot like that setup in post yesterday. It's possible that a lot of chasers could go up into northeastern Colorado, southwestern Nebraska, but I think you got to play Panhandle Magic this time of year. So that's this briefing so far on Monday. I think we're setting ourselves up for a Panhandle Magic Day on Tuesday. Let's look at Wednesday really quickly and look at the NAM. But I think that even looking that far out is just a little bit reckless these days. You know, there's a marginal risk, large marginal risk on this day on Wednesday. This is Wednesday. Looks like there's a hint of a surface low here over the southeastern Texas Panhandle, southwestern Oklahoma. Some backing out ahead of it. Probably get a little bit of a low-level jet pop out ahead of that as well. Does look like you got about 15 to 25 knots here at 850, backing just a little bit. The back edge of that 700 jet. See if there's any instability there, and there is a little bit of instability in that zone as well. Boy, both of these days are definitely not looking that substantial, but I do think southwestern Oklahoma, there you finally get that elevated mix layer punching in. That caret of dry air there between 700 and 500. Decent shape of a hodograph, but you could see this area of southwestern Oklahoma into northwestern Texas, the same area that had the tornado threat here recently. I could see that area kind of going up next and being the next area to watch on Wednesday, late afternoon and evening. So we've got 2 days of storm chasing ahead. We've got Tuesday. The NAM is definitely liking down near post as well, the regular NAM and the 3-kilometer NAM on Tuesday. If we can get 81 over 65 down there, I think there could even be a strong tornado or two down near post. Could even get a couple renegades from Turkey, Texas, moving in toward Hollis, far southwestern Oklahoma there. I think you want to play right up against the Caprock and kind of see the outline of it even as depicted by the NAM. Probably get a Del Rio supercell as well down here. Northern Mexico. We'll get a Del Rio storm. Yeah, I'm not working this boundary further north, that's for sure. Up into eastern Colorado, Lyman through Goodland. Probably be land spouts all over that thing, even well ahead of it, but more northerly, kind of northeasterly surface winds. Elevated supercells here above this frontal inversion, so you're going to tap into this mid-level cape. Here you can see, slide that thing over a little bit. You can see this capping inversion just above the ground. See that warm lid in the atmosphere? Above that, you've got a lot of cape, so you can tap into that MU cape, as we were talking about. The MU cape will be high. Your surface-based cape, surface-based parcel will be low, lower than the MU cape. But they do look like nice photographs, almost like a hurricane. We got the northeasterly surface winds. So if you just look at the hodograph, you can think, wow, that thing's got a tornado potential. But I think looking at the thermodynamics, you're going to have more elevated supercells in that environment. So thank you. Uh-oh. See, I had us trapped on that image there for a little while. But that's the hodograph I was just talking about for like the last 15 minutes. And I failed to change that imagery. There you can see the capping inversion. And that's the thermodynamics. You can see that warm air just above the ground. So the MU cape just above that capping inversion. That's where all the instability is located. And this is kind of a textbook elevated supercell type of a profile with those northeasterly winds at the surface, kind of a deeper stable layer beneath that capping inversion. But you do have favorable photographs for a tornado threat. And again, this is for that little narrow zone where there could be an overlap of some instability, even some surface-based instability with those east-northeasterly surface winds squeezing out a little bit of high plains insanity up there. But I think that the real high plains insanity is going to be down here in the southeastern Texas Panhandle. This is the regular NAM. It does have some decent photographs. That will increase, kind of becoming even more curved as you go toward 8 p.m. a little bit. But I like the thermodynamics of this sounding. Looks like an abundance of surface-based cape. A lot of heating down near post. Pretty steep lapse rate, 76 over 63. Easterly wind plume, funneling it up the terrain there. 2,500 cape. Look at that yellow down there. Your 0 to 1 kilometer SRH is a buck 28. So that's borderline, but then you get about 180 0 to 3 kilometer SRH in this sounding, and it's only going to improve as you go a little bit after 8 p.m. So I think that the wrap 3 kilometer NAM and the regular NAM are all kind of showing this environment in the southeastern Texas Panhandle being quite interesting, and down near post off the edge of the Caprock. So that's where we're likely going to target unless things change quite a bit. Thank you everybody for tuning in to this live weather briefing. Saw some tornadoes a couple days ago. I'm getting my new windshield right now at Binswanger Glass here in Norman. So excited to have my vehicle back running again. Probably could have got another chase or two out of that windshield, but it's just not that safe to drive with a cracked windshield like that and to try to shoot the tornado. You have to find little holes in the windshield where there aren't any cracks, which is almost impossible right now with the way the windshield looks. We're going to have the subsonic sensor back in the field as well for the next couple of days. Still waiting on the Dominator weather station. That's going to be available next month. Excited to get that out in the field and show you guys that thing in action. Research grade weather data will be collected with that. And here is the subsonic sensor. I'm going to try to connect to some GPS later on this morning as well. Maybe adhere this to the ground-based probe that's going to be carried in a tray on the back of Dominator 4 for the next couple of days. But thank you guys for joining me for this live update. More to come, including this evening when the 0Z models come out, and we should be able to hone down that area down near post where there's going to be the best co-location of surface-based instability and low-level shear. Thank you, everybody. Never stop chasing.